In JavaScript, each variable or piece of data is associated with a specific primitive or reference type. Whether you are writing a function, an object, an array, or a simple value like string, each of these has certain type, and sometimes it gets really hard to understand the type of data we have. You'll find yourself in situations where you are receiving data from resources, but you have no idea about the type of data. Okay, so I have also created this playlist, but that's not all. I have also written blog page for this video. Now before diving into all these concepts, first let me give you the overview of all the topics which we are going to explore in this video. I made content overview part after shooting this entire video, so let me tell you what you're gonna learn in this video. So first we'll talk about what are types. Obviously JavaScript doesn't provide types information because JavaScript is dynamically typed language. We'll learn about what are types and how they are useful if we identify them. Then we talked about primitive type and how we can identify primitive type, how they are stored in memory, and along with this explanation there is this blog page which you can follow, and you can also contribute to this blog page. There is link in description. Then we'll talk about reference type, how reference type are stored in memory, and some really nice example of reference type. In this video you learn everything in JavaScript is object. They have their own constructors. Okay, so this blog page is, this video is going to be something really cool for you. Okay, so yeah, let's start with very first topic. Because JavaScript hides type information, sometimes it gets really hard to work with JavaScript. So first topic I wanted to talk about is this: what are types? If you remember, in the beginning of this video I used two keywords. One is primitive and another is reference. These are two types in JavaScript and they basically explain everything about data types. Okay, so I have written this blog page, and cool thing is that I collected all these information from different resources such as MDN web docs and from different websites, so we could have a centralized repository. Talking about types, whatever language you use, whether it is JavaScript or any other programming language, types are just classification, or I could say different categories of values. So types are classification or different categories of value. Whatever language you use, we classify all the value in certain way. Now talking about JavaScript, so in JavaScript we write values like numbers, we also write string values, and we write different data structure, for example array, and we also write also define objects. So all these value has certain type, and what JavaScript does, JavaScript hide this type information. Obviously we have some method to identify the type. Okay, so this is all about type. Now I wanted to talk about primitive type, then we'll see difference between primitive and reference type, and we also see how we can identify certain types. Okay, so let's start with primitive types. Now let's talk about primitive types. In the beginning of this video I already told you that JavaScript has two types, one is primitive and another is reference. So primitive types are simple value and they are stored, they are simple value. For example, this value 10 or a string value false, and these weird guys like undefined and null. And reference type are stored as objects, so they are objects. So in reference type we generally have an array, function, all these things. Okay, so main difference between primitive type and reference type is how they are stored in a memory. Obviously memory is an important component for any programming language, and two important part of memories are, one is stack and another is heap. So in stack what we do, we store primitive type, so primitive type are stored in stack, and in heap reference type are stored. Okay, so stack is generally used for local variables and primitive type generally used for user defined data type. For example, we have this array or an object, or it might be a function. In heap memory is allocated dynamically. Okay, but in stack memory is allocated sequentially from bottom to top. Stack follow this simple philosophy, which is LIFO. LIFO means whatever comes last goes first. So this is basically how stack work. Now let me give you some code examples so we can actually see what primitive types are, and then we'll see how we can identify them. Okay, let me write very simple statement. Okay, let a is equal to 5. This is very simple statement, and in next line let me define another variable which is b, and let's say this b is equal to variable a. Now in these two code, what we expect that, so first we are defining a variable a, then we are making some sort of link between a and b, but let's see what actually happen in that code. Okay, so first we have created a variable a and we have added this value 10. In second case, we have created another variable and this variable a is assigned to this variable b. Now we know that this value 10 is a primitive type, and another property of primitive is that primitive types are immutable. You cannot change value of primitive type. Now let me tell you why we cannot change, because if you know reference type, in reference type we generally have an array. Okay, now we can easily change its size. For example, we can easily add some value, we can delete any entry. So reference type can change their shape and size, but primitive types are these isolated values and they cannot be changed. Okay, so primitive types are immutable. Now let me tell you what happened in this code. So first we have created this variable a and this a is equal to 10. In second case, it looks like there is a link between a and b, but that's not the case, because 10 is a primitive value, so there cannot be any link. So what happened here, this 10, a copy of this 10 is created and it is assigned to value b. So first what happened, first this a is added on top of stack, then b is added on top of stack. So this is how primitive type work. Now let me tell you how we can identify primitive type. In order to identify primitive type, we can use typeof operator, but typeof operator cannot identify all the primitive types. Okay, these are examples. Okay, we can easily identify these types. For example, we can easily identify a string or a number or a boolean value, but we cannot identify a null value, because this null value outputs, this type of operator along with this null value return us object, and that is why we cannot identify a null value. There is other method to do that, which I will tell you in a moment. Now let me tell you how we can identify null value. Okay, so from a server, sometime we receive data, right? And this data could be of any type, right? It could be an array. Okay, it could be an object, or it could be null. Now all these values has a type of object. Now how we are going to identify whether the type is a null? So in order to identify a null value, we can use triple equal operator. So we have two type of operator when it comes to comparison. Now let me tell you a little bit about triple equal operator. So triple equal operator, what it does, it compare two values and it do not convert one value from another. For example, if I have string 5 is equal to 5 integer. Now in that case, if we use double equal operator, it is going to change one of one of value into another, so they can be equal and this block is executed. But when we use triple equal operator, in that case none of this value is changed. So that is why we use triple equal operator. Okay, now if this object is an array, then obviously an array is not equal to this null value. So in that case, this is not going to execute. If this object is null, now they both have same type, so this block is executed. So this is basically how we identify a null value. Now there are some method we can use on top of primitive type. For example, we have this value string, so we can use method like to lowercase to convert this name into lowercase. Now that's the thing with JavaScript, because JavaScript is so consistent, we can even use method on primitive type. another language doesn't have this luxury. So in JavaScript we can use these methods on top of primitive type. Okay, so all these methods are in that blog page. Now let's see what are reference type. We have talked about primitive type in great detail. Now it's quite easy to understand how reference type work. Okay, so as I told you, primitive type are stored in stack and reference type are stored in heap. So in heap, memory is allocated randomly, so there is a random memory allocation. Now the point I'm trying to make is this stack, in this stack we add all these values, and these values are immutable, means their content cannot be changed. But reference type work opposite to this philosophy. Okay, so the thing I told you before is everything in JavaScript is object, right? Whether it is an array or function or object, so they have their object form. For example, this array, we can initialize array using its constructor, we can initialize function using function constructor, and obviously there is object constructor. So all these objects return us reference, okay, or we can say pointer instead of value we want. Okay, the thing with pointer or reference is that if you assign one value to another, for example, I have created this object, let's say this is object 1, and if I assign this object 1 to, for example, I initialize second variable object 2, if I assign this object 1 to object 2, then they are going to form a link. So I have also included this in my blog page. There it is. Okay, so if I assign one object to another, they are going to form a link. So they are referencing same object, or you can call these links reference, or you can call them pointer, whatever you like. All right, now let's see the impact of a reference in objects. Okay, so because there is a link between same object, so if I try to change property of this object using object 1, then it is going to affect object 2, and if I try to change this using object 2, it is going to affect object 1, because they are referencing the same value, right? If we manipulate this object using one variable, then it is obviously being displayed in second. So I have also given you this example. Okay, okay, so let me write it in editor. For example, we have this array. Let me write another name because a is already used. So let's say num. I have this num array and it has some values, and in second line if I do something like num prime, or I can say num2 is equal to num, in that case they are forming a link between one another. If I try to change property of num using, I mean num1 using num2, for example, if I do something like num2 dot push 34, so I'm adding new entry, let's say 38, because 34 already exists. Now if I console dot log this num1, then it is affected because of this num2. Okay, so let's run this file. As you can see, 38 is added. So in reference type there is a link between objects if we assign one object to another. Now let's see how we can identify an object. In primitive type we have seen that we can use this type of operator, and in reference type we can use this instance of operator. This instance of operator operate on two things. One is the variable, I can say one is variable and another is its constructor. Okay, for example, if I create a variable num1 and this num1 is an array, then its constructor will be this array. If I use reference of operator in between them, so it is going to return me true value. If instead of array, if I use another constructor, for example, if I use, let's say, function constructor, in that case it is going to return me false value. So this is how we can identify primitive type and reference type. Now I have given you this broad explanation, but if you want to read all these things in great detail, you can follow this blog page. And one more thing, if you want to contribute to this blog page, you can visit my GitHub. On my GitHub page, GitHub page, you'll find this repository, how dev view official. So this is my YouTube channel name, and you can subscribe to that channel if you want to. Okay, so in source folder there is this page. In page you'll find docs. In docs you'll find all these blogs, so you can contribute to this blog. For example, now we are in 2023 and you can contribute to this recent blog, primitive type and reference type. Okay, so that's all. If you like this video, why not subscribe to this channel.